Picture this. 3 women are frantically stabbing needles into a sheet of white silk. Their fingers are bleeding, staining the fabric, but they don't stop. The sun is dropping fast toward the horizon, and they are racing against the dying light. These are the daughters of Ragnar Lothbrok, and they are executing a forbidden ritual found in the annals of St. Neots. They have one single day to weave the Hrefn, the raven banner. If they finish before sunset, the black bird on the flag will come alive, beating its wings to guarantee victory. If they fail, or if the fabric hangs limp, their brothers will die. The final stitch snaps into place just as the light vanishes. This living weapon is then thrust into the hands of Ubbe Ragnarsson. He doesn't just hold a flag, he grips the detonator for an invasion that will shatter the spine of England. Before diving into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. The year 865 AD doesn't knock politely on the door of British history. It kicks the door off its hinges. On the coast of East Anglia, the mist parts to reveal a nightmare scenario. Keel after keel grinds into the sand. This isn't a raiding party looking for quicksilver. Men pour from the ships by the thousands, hauling crates, weapons and timber. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records their arrival with a terrified brevity. The missile here has landed. The Great Heathen Army. At the centre of this chaotic beachhead stands Ubbe. While the sagas often paint his brother Ivar as the shouting maniac, Ubbe commands with a terrifying silent efficiency. He watches the unloading process like a modern quartermaster. He knows that an army of this size cannot survive on scavenged scraps. They need a base, they need speed. Ubbe wastes no time burning peasant huts. He marches his forces directly to the gates of King Edmund's stronghold. The East Anglian king watches from his walls, paralysed. He expects a siege, battering rams, the usual brutal script of Viking warfare. Ubbe flips the script. He sends a messenger with a demand that sounds insane to traditional Viking ears. He doesn't want gold, he wants horses, every mount the kingdom possesses. Edmund is cornered. If he fights, his kingdom burns today. If he capitulates, he buys time. He chooses survival, opening his stables to the invaders. It is a fatal miscalculation. Ubbe strips the kingdom of its mobility. In days, the Vikings do the unthinkable. They mount up. Imagine the shockwave running through the Saxon scouts. Vikings are sailors, they are infantry, they are shield walls, they are not cavalry. Yet, here is Ubbe Ragnarsson, transforming a horde of sea raiders into a mounted strike force. This adaptation changes the physics of the war. The Great Heathen Army is no longer tethered to the slow pace of marching boots. They become a projectile. Winter passes in a blur of preparation. The East Anglians live with knives at their throats, watching their guests sharpen axes and shoe horses. Ubbe uses this downtime to drill discipline into a force that usually thrives on chaos. He is forging a weapon specifically designed to break Northumbria. When spring 866 arrives, the truce shatters. The army rides out not as a disorganised mob, but as a thundering column of steel and horseflesh. The ground shakes as they turn north, bypassing defences, outrunning news of their own approach. At the vanguard, the raven banner snaps in the wind. Witnesses swear the black wings are flapping violently. The magic holds. Ubbe Ragnarsson has successfully weaponized a superstition and mobilized a nation. The target is York, and for the first time in history, the Vikings are riding to war, leaving the sea and the old rules far behind them. November 1st, 866 AD, All Saints' Day. Inside the Cathedral of York, the Northumbrian nobility bow their heads in prayer. The air smells of incense and beeswax candles. Outside, the air smells of impending winter and unwashed horses. Ubbe Ragnarsson has chosen this specific date with malicious precision. He knows the Saxons will be distracted by their holy rites, their guards reduced, their attention turned toward heaven while hell approaches from the road. The Great Heathen Army does not knock, it floods the city. By the time the prayers end, the city of York, the ancient Roman capital of the north, belongs to the Danes. This capture reveals the terrifying competence of the sons of Ragnar Lothbrok. They didn't just storm the walls, they exploited a fatal flaw in Northumbrian politics. The kingdom was tearing itself apart in a civil war between two rival kings, Osbert, the legitimate ruler, and Aella, the usurper. While these two Saxon rivals were busy fighting each other, Ubbe simply walked through the back door. He turned York into a fortress, repairing the crumbling Roman walls that had stood for nearly 1,000 years. He wasn't just squatting, he was digging in. Winter bites hard in the north. The Saxons, realising their folly too late, finally unite. Alla and Osbert put aside their hatred to face the common enemy. In March 867, they launch a desperate counterattack. On paper, they have the numbers. They breach the city walls. The Northumbrians pour into the narrow streets of York, thinking they have cornered the rats. They are wrong. They have entered a slaughterhouse designed by Ubbe. Street fighting negates superior numbers. In the cramped alleys, the long Saxon spears are useless. The Vikings, armed with short axes and heavy shields, turn the city grid into a meat grinder. The chronicle describes excessive slaughter. Osbert is cut down in the mud, his royal blood mixing with the gutter water. The remaining Saxon forces panic, but the gates are choked with bodies. There is no escape. But for King Aella, death does not come quickly in the heat of battle. Ubbe has special orders regarding this man. Aella is the king who, according to legend, threw Ragnar Lothbrok into a pit of vipers. He is the reason the Great Heathen Army exists. He is taken alive. What happens next is a subject of intense historical debate. Some modern historians argue it was a mistranslation of poetic metaphors, but for the people of the 9th century, the ritual of the blood eagle was a terrifying possibility. We must look at this through Ubbe's eyes. He needs to send a message that transcends language, a message that will make every king in England wake up screaming. Ubbe and his brothers drag Aella to a hill overlooking the city. They strip him to the waist. The execution requires a surgical, anatomical cruelty. The victim is placed prone. The executioner takes a blade, likely a heavy sayax, and severs the ribs from the spine one by one. The sound of bone snapping echoes across the silent field. This is not frenzy. It is work. Once the ribs are detached, they are pulled outward, creating the shape of wings on the victim's back. The final stage is the most grotesque. The lungs are pulled out through the wounds and draped over the wings. As the victim gasps his last breaths, the lungs inflate and deflate, making the bloody wings appear to flap. Aella is transformed into a bird of prey, a mockery of Odin's ravens. Whether this happened exactly as described, or was a piece of dark propaganda, the effect was identical. The story of the blood eagle raced down the Roman roads faster than any horse. It paralysed the will of the English resistance. Ubbe had proven that he wasn't just a warlord who wanted land, he was a punisher. He had turned the body of a king into a billboard for Viking supremacy. With York secured and the Northumbrian dynasty extinguished, Ubbe installs a puppet king, a man named Ecbert, to collect taxes and keep the peace. This is the shift. A raider burns the farm, a conqueror taxes it. Ubbe is now the de facto ruler of the north. He sits in the halls where Roman emperors once sat, looking south toward Mercia and Wessex. He has the river, he has the fortress, and he has the reputation of a monster. But monsters eventually encounter heroes, and far to the south, a young sickly prince named Alfred is beginning to read books on military strategy. The board is set. By 869 AD, the Great Heathen Army has become a travelling natural disaster. After breaking Northumbria and paralysing Mercia, Ubbe turns his eyes back to where it all began, East Anglia. 4 years ago, King Edmund had bought his survival with horses. He likely hoped the Danes would never return, that he had paid his exit fee from the war. He was wrong. Ubbe does not leave loose ends. He returns not to negotiate, but to liquidate the army camps at Thetford. This time, Edmund refuses to bow. Perhaps he's emboldened by his faith, or perhaps he realises that feeding the crocodile only makes it grow larger. He musters his forces. The battle is brief and catastrophic. The East Anglian levy, composed of farmers and local lords, shatters against the shield wall of veterans who have spent 4 years killing for a living. Edmund is captured. Here, the narrative shifts from military history to theological warfare. In Northumbria, Ubbe installed a puppet king who was happy to pay taxes to stay alive. He expects Edmund to do the same. Renounce your independence, pay the Dane Geld, and maybe renounce this Christ who clearly didn't save you on the battlefield. Ubbe operates on the logic of power. The strong take, the weak submit. It is simple. Edmund, however, introduces a variable Ubbe cannot calculate: conviction. The king refuses to submit to a heathen overlord unless Ubbe converts to Christianity. To Ubbe, this is baffling arrogance. A defeated man dictating terms. The Viking response is designed to break this spiritual resistance through physical deconstruction. They tie Edmund to a tree. The chronicler Abbo of Fleury describes the scene with gruesome clarity. The Vikings do not kill him instantly. They use him for target practice. Archers step forward, firing volley after volley. They are careful not to hit vital organs immediately. The arrows stud his body, covering him like the bristles of a hedgehog. It is a slow, agonizing torture designed to elicit a plea for mercy. They want him to beg. They want to show his people that their king is just meat, and their god is silent. Edmund does not beg. He continues to call out to Christ. Frustrated and perhaps unnerved by this defiance, Ubbe orders the final blow. A sword swings, severing Edmund's head. The body slumps, still pinned to the oak tree by Danish iron. To ensure the humiliation is complete, the Vikings toss his head into the dense undergrowth of the forest, denying him a proper burial. A final insult to a Christian soul. In the short term, this is a victory. East Anglia falls. The resistance is decapitated literally and figuratively. But in the long term, Ubbe has just manufactured a weapon he cannot fight. By killing Edmund in this specific ritualistic way, he transforms a minor regional king into Saint Edmund the Martyr. Almost immediately, stories begin to circulate. Locals claim that a wolf, a beast usually associated with Odin, guarded the king's severed head, shouting "Hear, hear" to searchers. The site becomes a shrine. A cult of resistance grows around the memory of the king who would not bow. Ubbe understands how to fight armies. He understands how to bribe traitors, but he does not understand how to fight a ghost. This act of extreme violence accidentally plants the seeds of a unified English identity, rooted in shared suffering and faith. Ubbe thinks he has cleared the board. In reality, he has just cemented the moral foundation of the enemy. With East Anglia now fully under the Danish heel, the Great Heathen Army controls the north and the east. They are no longer just an invading force, they are an occupying power. But the men are getting tired. They are rich with plunder, yet they are still sleeping in tents on frozen ground. A question begins to circulate around the campfires, whispered at first, then spoken aloud by the boldest warriors. When do we stop running and start living? For nearly a century, the rhythm of the North Sea was predictable. It followed the seasons, ice meant peace, and thaw meant war. Vikings were migratory predators. They arrived with the spring winds, filled their holds with silver, and vanished before the autumn gales turned the sea white. This was the Viking rule. It was a hit-and-run economy that kept them safe. You cannot burn a raider's home if his home is a moving ship. You cannot starve an enemy who leaves as soon as the food runs out. But in the mid-870s, Ubbe and the leadership of the Great Heathen Army make a decision that violates this fundamental doctrine. They stop moving. The turning point occurs at Repton, deep in the heart of Mercia. The Great Heathen Army, once a singular, unstoppable avalanche, cracks down the middle. Halfdan, one of Ragnar's sons, takes a portion of the host north back to Northumbria. He is tired of endless campaigning. The Anglo-Saxon chronicle records his intent with chilling simplicity. He shared out the land of the Northumbrians, and they proceeded to plough and to support themselves. Read that again. They proceeded to plough. These men who have spent their lives gripping axe handles are now gripping ploughshares. They are trading the glory of the shield wall for the drudgery of the harvest. This is the birth of the Danelaw. It isn't just a military occupation, it is a migration. They are writing themselves into the landscape. However, Ubbe, along with the warlord Guthrum, looks south. They are not ready to retire to a farm in Yorkshire. They see one final obstacle standing between them and total domination of the island, the Kingdom of Wessex. But to conquer Wessex, they need to adopt this new strategy of permanence. They begin to partition East Anglia and Mercia, creating a network of fortified towns, the 5 boroughs. This shift from raiders to settlers completely alters the strategic reality. On one hand, it makes them infinitely more dangerous. They are no longer visitors, they are neighbours. They control the roads, the bridges and the markets. They impose their laws, their weights and measures, and their language. On the other hand, this decision exposes a massive vulnerability. Ubbe is smart, but he overlooks a critical weakness of civilization. When you own land, you are anchored. You have crops that can be burned, cattle that can be stolen, and borders that must be defended. A Viking fleet can sail away from a defeat. A Viking kingdom cannot. By choosing to settle, Ubbe and his brothers voluntarily give up their greatest advantage, mobility. They are now playing by the same rules as the Saxon kings they despised. They have become static targets. And down in the swamps of Somerset, the last independent king of England is watching this transition. He realises that a stationary enemy is an enemy that can be bled. The Vikings have planted their roots, but in doing so they have given the English an axe target. The age of the raid is over, the war of attrition has begun. By 874 AD, the Great Heathen Army has cracked the spine of Mercia, the massive kingdom in the English Midlands. King Burgred, who had ruled for 22 years, flees to Rome to die in exile. The throne is empty. A vacuum of power usually invites chaos, but Ubbe Ragnarsson abhors chaos within his own borders. He needs stability in the rear so he can focus his eyes on the front. He solves the Mercian problem not with a sword but with a handshake. Ubbe and his commanders select a man named Ceolwulf. The Anglo-Saxon chronicle written by his enemies in Wessex sneers at him. They call him a foolish king's thane. They paint him as a traitorous idiot who sold his soul for a borrowed crown. But if we strip away the Saxon propaganda, Ceolwulf II appears as a masterstroke of Viking pragmatism. Ubbe realises that occupying Mercia, a land of sprawling forests and stubborn local lords, would require thousands of Danish warriors to act as policemen. That is a waste of manpower. Instead, he installs Ceolwulf. The deal is explicit. Ceolwulf swears oaths on Viking armourings, he provides hostages, he agrees to hold the kingdom for the use of the army whenever they require it. Effectively, Ubbe outsources the administration of the occupied territories. This is the puppet master strategy. Ceolwulf collects the taxes. Ceolwulf suppresses the local rebellions. Ceolwulf keeps the roads open. And Ubbe? Ubbe takes the profit without doing the paperwork. This arrangement transforms Mercia from a war zone into a logistical superhighway for the Danes. It serves as a massive buffer state, protecting the newly settled lands in the north from the hostile south. With the Midlands pacified and the north settled, the Great Heathen Army undergoes a final significant restructuring. They gather at Repton one last time. It is a parting of ways. Halfdan takes his portion of the army north to fight the Picts and solidify the Danelaw. He chooses the path of the settler king. Ubbe, however, is not done. He joins forces with Guthrum and a king named Ossetel. Their eyes are fixed on the only kingdom left standing, Wessex. This is the final piece of the puzzle. If Wessex falls, the island becomes Daneland. The strategy is sound. They have the numbers. They have the secure supply lines from Ceolwulf's Mercia. They have the element of surprise. In 876, they slip past the Saxon army and seize the port of Wareham. Then they strike at Exeter. They are circling the prey, tightening the noose around the neck of the last English king. Ubbe is confident. He has dismantled 3 kingdoms in 10 years. He has killed kings, exiled kings, and hired kings. He sees no reason why the young ruler of Wessex should be any different. But playing the puppet master creates a blind spot. When you are used to pulling strings, you forget that some men refuse to be tied down. Ubbe assumes Wessex will crumble under the same pressure that broke Mercia. He's applying a formula that has worked 3 times in a row. He drives his army toward the southwest, unaware that he is marching into a terrain and against a mind that operates on a completely different level of desperation. History usually remembers kings in their finery, sitting on high thrones. But the man destined to stop the Viking apocalypse is currently covered in mud, hiding in a reed bed in the Somerset levels. To understand the trap Ubbe is about to walk into, we must understand how close Wessex came to extinction. In January 878, the Vikings break the rules of war yet again. Campaign season is supposed to be spring and summer. Winter is for feasting. But Guthrum, likely coordinating with Ubbe, launches a lightning strike on Twelfth Night, the Feast of the Epiphany. The Saxons are drunk, celebrating the end of Christmas at the royal estate of Chippenham. They wake up to the sound of axes smashing through the doors. The kingdom of Wessex decapitates itself in a single night. The nobles flee or surrender. The army dissolves. King Alfred, the last hope of English Christendom, barely escapes with a small bodyguard. He retreats into the impenetrable marshes of Athelney. This is not a strategic withdrawal, it is a collapse. For all intents and purposes, England has fallen. The map is now Danish from the North Sea to the Channel. From the Viking perspective, the war is won. Guthrum occupies the throne room. Ubbe is commanding the fleet in the Bristol Channel. They view Alfred as a deposed exile, a swamp king ruling over frogs and herons. This arrogance is their first major strategic error. They mistake the loss of territory for the loss of authority. Deep in the marshes, Alfred undergoes a transformation. Stripped of his castles and his treasury, he invents a new kind of warfare out of necessity. He cannot meet the Danes in a shield wall battle. He would be slaughtered. So he creates a prototype of guerrilla resistance. Small bands of Saxons emerge from the swamp, ambush Viking foraging parties, steal their supplies, and vanish back into the mist. Alfred turns the landscape into a weapon. The heavy Danish cavalry, so effective in the open fields of Mercia, is useless in the boggy terrain of Somerset. The Vikings are apex predators on land and sea, but here, in this amphibious twilight zone, they are clumsy. They bleed from 1,000 small cuts. Crucially, Alfred maintains his network. He uses the intricate system of burrs and messengers to keep hope alive. He isn't just hiding, he's broadcasting. The message is simple. The king lives. God is testing us. Prepare for the return. Ubbe, sailing his fleet off the coast of Devon, decides to end this annoyance. He plans a classic pincer movement. Guthrum will press from the east, Ubbe will land in the west. They will crush the Swamp King between them like a nut. Ubbe commands a fleet of 23 ships and over 1,000 seasoned warriors. He carries the Raven banner. He has never known defeat. He looks at the ragged coast of Devon and sees just another mopping up operation. He does not realise that by stripping Alfred of his court, he has stripped him of his caution. The animal he is hunting is no longer a civilised king. It is a desperate survivor with nothing left to lose. It is late winter, 878 AD. The coast of North Devon is a wall of jagged rock against a grey sea. Ubbe Ragnarsson's fleet of 23 ships emerges from the mist, aiming for the mouth of the River Parrett. His intelligence is good. He knows that the elder man of Devon, a man named Odda, is gathering survivors in the area. Ubbe lands his force over 1,000 strong, expecting a quick rout. Odda does exactly what a weaker force should do. He runs. He retreats to a location the chronicle calls Sinwit, identified by modern historians as the precipitous Countersbury Hill. From a military standpoint, the hill is a nightmare to attack. It is surrounded by sheer cliffs on 3 sides, dropping hundreds of feet into the sea. There is only one narrow approach from the land, but it has a fatal flaw, one that Ubbe spots immediately. There is no well inside the fortifications, no spring, no cistern. This is the moment where Ubbe Ragnarsson loses the war. Not because he is outfought, but because he is suffering from what modern military historians call victory disease. Victory disease happens when a commander becomes intoxicated by his own success. Ubbe has spent 12 years undefeated. He has toppled kings in Northumbria, East Anglia and Mercia. He looks up at that hill and sees a terrified, dehydrated rabble led by a minor noble. He doesn't see a threat. He sees a nuisance. A younger, hungrier Ubbe might have stormed the ramparts immediately, accepting the casualties to secure the kill. But the Ubbe of 878 is an aristocrat of war. Why waste good Danish blood climbing a hill when thirst will do the work for you? He calculates the variables. A human being can survive 3 days without water, but combat effectiveness drops after 24 hours. He orders his men to set up a siege perimeter. They block the only exit. They pitch their tents, light their fires, and settle in. They are so confident that they likely do not even dig defensive trenches facing the hill. Why would they? Sheep don't attack wolves. Up on the hill, the situation is indeed dire. The Saxons are parched. The crying of thirsty men echoes off the rocks. But Ubbe's calculation misses the psychological variable. If you give a man a chance to surrender, he might take it. But if you back him into a corner where death is certain, either by the slow agony of thirst or the quick stroke of a sword, you clarify his mind. By waiting, Ubbe gives Odda time to realise that there is no tomorrow. The Saxons look down at the Viking camp. They see the smoke of the cooking fires. They see the legendary raven banner planted in the earth fluttering in the sea breeze. It is the symbol of their inevitable doom, but it is also a target. As the sun sets, the Viking camp quiets down. Ubbe Ragnarsson goes to sleep, secure in the logic of warfare. He believes he's tightening a noose. He doesn't realise he has just locked himself in a cage with 1,000 desperate animals who have decided they would rather die fighting than die thirsty. Dawn at Sinwit does not break with the sun, it breaks with a scream. Before the first light hits the water, the gates of the hill fort swing open. But the Saxons do not come out with their hands up begging for water. They pour down the slope like a landslide of desperate men. Odda of Devon has rolled the dice. He knows his starving militia cannot win a prolonged fight against professional Viking killers. His only ally is gravity. The Saxons slam into the sleeping Danish camp with the force of a freight train. The psychological shock is absolute. The Vikings wake up to the sound of tearing canvas and splitting skulls. There is no time to form the shield wall, the one formation that makes them invincible. A Viking without a shield wall is just a man with an axe standing alone in the dark. The camp dissolves into chaos. The predators have become the prey. Ubbe Ragnarsson rallies his personal guard near the centre of the camp. For a moment it seems the sheer skill of the Ragnarssons might turn the tide. These are men who have fought in the snows of Russia and the rivers of France. They cut through the initial wave of Saxons with terrifying ease. But there are simply too many enemies, and they are too close. The fighting is not a duel. It is a crush. It is a brawl in a mud pit where skill matters less than ferocity. In the swirling madness, the unthinkable happens. Ubbe Ragnarsson falls. The chronicles do not give us a poetic final speech. There is no dramatic duel with Odda. The reality of war is often disappointing and brutal. Ubbe likely dies under a flurry of spear thrusts, overwhelmed by the very peasants he came to rule. The architect of the invasion, the man who broke 3 kingdoms, is butchered on a muddy beach in Devon. But his death is not the catastrophic blow. The true disaster for the Vikings occurs moments later. In the melee, the Saxon warriors fight their way to the command tent. They seize the raven banner. Remember the legend. If the banner flutters, victory is assured. If it hangs limp, defeat follows. But the legend never accounted for the banner being stolen. To the surviving Danes, seeing the Refn in Saxon hands is not just a tactical loss, it is a theological apocalypse. Their god has not just abandoned them, he has been captured. Panic spreads faster than fire. The discipline of the Great Heathen Army evaporates. They flee toward their ships, desperate to escape the cursed beach. But the tide is out, or the pursuit is too fast. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records the grim arithmetic. 840 men are slaughtered. The sun rises over a silent beach. The Great Heathen Army has lost its commander, its symbol of divine protection, and its aura of invincibility. Odda of Devon stands over the corpse of Ubbe Ragnarsson. He hasn't just won a battle, he has broken the spell. For the first time in 15 years, the Vikings have been annihilated in open combat. The news travels east to Alfred in the swamps, and for the first time the king smiles. The board has been reset. News in the 9th century usually travels at the speed of a horse, but the disaster at Sinwit likely travels faster, carried by the terrifying silence of a fleet that never arrives. In the east, the warlord Guthrum is waiting. His plan is solid. He's holding the line at Chippenham waiting for Ubbe to land in the west. They are the two jaws of a trap ready to snap shut on King Alfred. Guthrum waits for the signal, smoke on the horizon, or panic spreading from the coast. Instead, he receives the survivors. They bring a story that seems impossible. Ubbe is dead. The Raven banner is gone. The army is scattered. In that moment, the strategic map of England flips upside down. The pincer movement evaporates. Guthrum is no longer one half of a crushing force. He is suddenly isolated deep in enemy territory. He has lost his flank protection. Worse, he has lost the aura of inevitability. For King Alfred, the news from Sinwit is like oxygen filling a vacuum. Just weeks ago, he was a fugitive in a swamp. Now he is the leader of a resistance that has drawn first blood. The psychological impact cannot be overstated. Before Sinwit, the Vikings were viewed as supernatural punishments from God, monsters who could not be killed, only bribed. But Odder of Devon proved that they bleed, they die, they can be broken. Alfred seizes this momentum. He rides out of the marshes of Athelney. He rides to Egbert Stone, a traditional meeting place on the border of his kingdom. He blows the horns of war. The Anglo-Saxon chronicle describes the scene with moving simplicity. When they saw the king, they received him like one risen from the dead. The men of Somerset, Wiltshire and Hampshire flood to his banner. They are not gathering to die, they are gathering to win. 7 weeks after Easter, 878 AD, the two forces collide at the Battle of Edington. This is the showdown that decides the fate of the English language. But look closely at the Viking line. It is thinner than it should be. The 1,000 warriors who died with Ubbe at Cynwit are missing. The tactical genius of Ubbe is missing. Guthrum is a capable fighter, but without Ubbe's strategic mind, he is outmaneuvered. Alfred utilises the shield wall tactic, the very tactic the Vikings used to dominate England, and grinds Guthrum's forces into the dust. The Danes break. They flee back to their fortress in Chippenham, but this time, Alfred does not pay them to leave. He besieges them. He starves them. 3 weeks later, Guthrum surrenders. This is the end of the Great Heathen Army as a conquering force. Guthrum accepts baptism. He agrees to the Treaty of Wedmore, which divides England in two. The Vikings get the north and east, the Danelaw, and Alfred keeps the south. Historians often celebrate Edington as Alfred's victory, but we must trace the causality back one step further. Edington was only possible because of Cynwit. If Ubbe Ragnarsson had not been arrogant, if he had stormed that hill in Devon, if he had linked up with Guthrum as planned, the Saxon army at Edington would have been crushed between two fronts. Alfred would likely be a footnote in a Danish history book. Ubbe's death was the domino that knocked over the entire invasion. The dream of a unified Viking England died on that beach in Devon, alongside the man who designed it. The Vikings will remain in England for centuries, yes. They will trade, farm and eventually rule again under Knut. But never again will they come so close to total erasure of the Anglo-Saxon world. The tide has turned, not by the will of kings, but by the mistake of one man who thought he was invincible. History often favours the loud. We remember Ivar the Boneless for his terrifying cruelty. We remember Bjorn Ironside for his adventurous voyages to the Mediterranean. But Ubbe Ragnarsson sits in a quieter, more complex category. He was not a caricature of a Viking villain, he was a visionary. He was the man who realised that the true wealth of England wasn't in its church vaults, but in its soil. Ubbe was the architect of the Danelaw. Look at a map of England today. If you see a town ending in "-by", like Derby or Whitby, or Thorpe, like Scunthorpe, you are looking at Ubbe's legacy. These are not Saxon names, they are Danish. He changed the genetic and linguistic DNA of the island forever. He proved that Vikings could be more than just pirates. They could be neighbours, farmers and rulers. But his story carries a brutal warning that resonates far beyond the 9th century. Ubbe Ragnarsson was the ultimate disruptor. He changed the rules of warfare by mounting his infantry. He changed the rules of economics by settling the land. Yet, in the end, he was destroyed because he forgot a fundamental truth of human nature. Desperation is a force multiplier. At Sinwit, Ubbe applied a logical solution, a siege, to an emotional problem, survival. He assumed his enemies would act rationally. He assumed they would surrender when the water ran out. He failed to see that when you take away a man's future, you also take away his fear. Because of that single miscalculation on a hill in Devon, the Great Heathen Army faltered. Because of that, Alfred the Great survived to build the foundation of England. Because of that, we are speaking English today, not a dialect of Danish. The Raven Banner was never seen again. Some say it was burned by the Christians, others say it was buried in a secret vault in Wessex. But its magic, if it existed, was broken not by a greater sorcery, but by the grit of starving men who refused to die quietly. Ubbe Ragnarsson's life teaches us that you can be the smartest person in the room, you can have the biggest army, and you can change the world. But if you underestimate the person you are stepping on, you will lose everything. He wanted to be a king of England. Instead, he became the cautionary tale that allowed England to exist. So what do you think? Was Ubbe's defeat at Cynwit truly the turning point? Or was the Viking settlement inevitable regardless of who won that battle? And if the Raven Banner had not been captured, do you think the superstition of the Vikings would have carried them to victory at Edington? If you enjoyed this deep dive into the forgotten architect of the Viking Age, please subscribe and turn on notifications. I have a lot more stories like this, tales of arrogance, survival, and the thin line between victory and ruin. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next chapter of history.